Lucky Catch. Written by Deborah Coonts. Narrated by Patricia Santamasso. Chapter 1. Love and lust. Two four-letter words men often confuse. More specifically, a certain man. The man standing in my doorway. Teddie. My heart tripped, then steadied. Thinner than I remembered, he still had that tight ass, those broad shoulders, spiky blonde hair, soulful baby blues, and a sippin' whiskey smooth voice that could warm me to the core, despite my best efforts to douse the fire. Teddie. Despite serious reservations about turning a platonic friendship into something not platonic, I had let him lead me into the deep, dark waters of love. And being an all-or-nothing kind of gal, I'd done a half-gainer off the high dive and things had not gone swimmingly. He left, and now he was back. As I looked at him and tried to compose myself, it just wouldn't do to let him see the splash his return made. I wondered how I'd ever get my heart back. The empty hole in my chest echoed with longing, leaving me winded. My office phone jangled, giving me an excuse to avoid Teddie for a few moments longer. I grabbed the receiver. Customer Relations, Lucky O'Toole speaking. How may I help you? We have a problem. Detective Romeo with the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department started in without preliminaries. Not a good sign. What's this we shit, Kimosabi? I tried to make light. Apparently, I failed miserably. Romeo's tone hardened. Dead body? Back lot? Somebody wrapped her head in plastic and killed her with the safety smoke. You're going to want to see this one. She got smoked with a safety smoke? Dang. I rubbed a hand over my face. I never want to see that kind of thing. You know that. I looked up and locked eyes with Teddie, who stared at me, his eyes dark and troubled. Trust me on this one. Romeo took an audible breath, then let it out slowly. Okay, give me 15 minutes. I've got to take Christophe Bouclé back to his father. I'll meet you there. This one's bad. As if they all aren't bad. Meet me where? My only answer was the hollow echo of a disconnected line. Romeo had hung up. He knew how much I hated that little bit of rudeness. Men. I narrowed my eyes at a prime example of the Y chromosome set standing in front of me. Teddie knew me well enough to take a step back. Romeo? He asked, with a forced lilt to his voice. I set the receiver back in its cradle, but refused to let Romeo and Teddie get me all worked up. Problems I could handle. As the vice president of customer relations at the Babylon, Las Vegas's most over-the-top strip property, problems were my job. And if I can say anything about myself, I'm good at my job. Now, to the most immediate problem. Teddie, why are you here? Ignoring my glower, he continued with the manner of an old friend stopping by to reminisce. Your office door was open, he began in a casual tone, as if the earth still rotated on the same axis. I expected to find you in your old office. What are you doing back here in this construction zone? Not VP Diggs. Congrats on the promotion, by the way. Teddie paused when his eyes came to rest on the young boy in my lap who clutched a crayon and concentrated on the drawing in front of him. I saw questions lurking in Teddie's eyes. Thankfully, he didn't voice them, choosing instead to give me a tentative grin. A dagger to the heart. A frown was the only response I could muster, as my pulse pounded in my ears, and I struggled to remain outwardly calm. This early in the morning, I expected to see your staff out front, he continued, oblivious to the fact this whole situation was fraught with possibilities of homicide. But the desks were empty. Since you and I are friends, I didn't think you'd mind me wandering back here to find you. What was I going to say? Get the hell out seemed a bit extreme, and no, we're not friends would have been too hard to admit. Offering to shoot him the next time he wandered in unannounced also seemed a bit aggressive. Maybe. I opted to duck and weave. If I minded, would it matter? Teddie's smile dimmed, and he jammed his hands in his pockets as he shifted from one foot to the other, his shoulders hunched around his ears. I took a deep breath and blew at a strand of hair that tickled my eyes. To be honest, you were the last person I expected to darken my doorway this morning. Weren't you just in Prague or Moscow or someplace half a world away?
I quit the tour and jumped a plane.
Taking a step inside the doorway, he was brought up short by the look on my face. His arms wide, pleading, he said,
I had to see you.
I wasn't buying it. He was always a bit of a drama queen, which, now that I thought about it, went with the whole female impersonator gig. I'd just never noticed it before. Or it had never bothered me before. Ever the performer, he adopted just the right tone, pleading without the whine.
You won't take my calls? You won't answer the messages I send you? You haven't even acknowledged the song. What did you expect me to do?
He let his arms fall to his sides. Expect? My voice was flat, hard, pounded thin by the hammer of his insensitivity. And the song he mentioned? Every time I heard the thing, he bludgeoned me anew. Didn't he understand that? Teddie, I expected you to stay gone. Hurt flashed across his face as we stared at each other, and time slowed to a crawl. He looked like he wanted to explore the subject further, but wisely altered course.
Got a new friend, I see.
He nodded toward the boy. Kristoff squirmed under Teddie's scrutiny, then leaned back and looked up at me. While I counted to 10 and prayed for self-control and a non-inflammatory response, I bent down and gave the boy a kiss on the head. He smelled like baby soap, and with good reason. Last night we'd used a gallon of the stuff. That was before I'd spent the night with his father. Christophe Bouclé. My eyes found Teddie's, then skittered away and back again. Knowing me, I had guilty as sin written all over my face. But he'd left, so why did I feel guilty? Life had just gotten way more than complicated. I had absolutely no idea where to start or what to do. To be honest, I wasn't 100% sure that, once started, I wouldn't finish by grabbing Teddie by the neck and squeezing the life out of him. As it turned out, I needn't have worried. My cell phone sang out at my hip, saving me from a long future making license plates at the invitation of the great state of Nevada. Actually, it was Teddie doing the singing. In a weak, masochistic moment, I'd installed as my ringtone a snippet of a song he'd written not only for me, but about me as well. Yes, that song. The one he'd mentioned and I'd avoided. He'd titled it, Lucky for Me. Apparently, he loved irony. At the first few notes, Teddie gave me a knowing look. I hastily reached for the device and silenced it with a stroke of my thumb. I gave him a steely stare, challenging the assumption I saw in his eyes. Never wavering, I pressed the phone to my ear. "O'Toole," I barked.
How do you make 1,000 turkeys disappear?
What? I held the phone in front of me and squinted at the display, trying to bring into focus not only the tiny digits, but life as well. The number belonged to Jerry, the voice belonged to Jerry, but the question came out of left field, even from the Babylon's head of security. "Jerry, this really isn't a good time."
Tell me about it, he chuckled. I got turkeys down here, the real things, 1,000 of them.
Chaos in the background filtered through the connection.
You know anything about them?
I glanced up at Teddie. Turkeys seemed to abound today. And to think, Thanksgiving was still a few days away.
Lucky girl, are you there? We could sure use your help.
As the Babylon's chief problem solver, turkeys like the one standing in my office doorway were my specialty. However, my expertise did not necessarily extend to the feathered variety. I put the phone back to my ear. "I'm here, but I'm confused. Where are you? And just for clarification, what kind of turkeys are we talking about?" Jerry replied in a rushed voice.
The basement, level 2. Your mother...
The light dawned. Oh, God. She didn't.
She did.
This time, he burst out laughing.
Mona, she is some piece of work. Better get that woman down here. And tell her if she plans on feeding the hungry on Thanksgiving, she'd better bring her double barrel and a shitload of buckshot.
Some people are alive solely because it's illegal to shoot them. Jerry laughed.
Your mother
is their fearless leader, I said, finishing his thought. But you aren't seriously considering turning a pregnant woman loose in the basement with a loaded shotgun, are you? Remember what she did to the sheriff?
Any other ideas?
Jerry's voice sobered a bit. Fresh out. I glanced up at Teddie, A frown creased the skin between his eyes as he watched Kristoff, who was working intently on his drawing. And since answers on this end seem to be in short supply, I'm invoking one of my 3 vice president lifelines and I'm phoning a friend. That would be you, by the way.
But I called you,
Jerry reminded me. A mere technicality. Mother is your problem. I'll get her down there. You figure out what happens next. If you kill her, just let me know where to send flowers. I terminated the call before he could guilt me into more. My vintage Versace suit and Lubus were hardly turkey-taming attire, and I didn't really trust myself around Mona right now, especially with a gun within easy reach. Today was Monday, in every way. My eyes met Teddie's, and my heart tightened. Would I ever be over him? Kristoff stilled in my lap. It's okay, sweetie. I gave the boy another hurried peck on the top of his head. Ignore the man in the doorway. He's leaving. With both hands under Kristoff's arms, I lifted him as I slithered out from under him, then deposited him back in the chair. And so are we. The boy wiggled his legs underneath him. Kneeling, he bent back over the picture he had been drawing when we'd been so rudely interrupted. I'm drawing a picture of you and Papa and my happy face pancakes. He gave me a look designed to melt my heart. God help womankind in another 10 or 12 years. See? He pointed to one figure. You have Papa's shirt on. I sighed. Like I said, a Monday in every way. That's wonderful, dear. It was fun, wasn't it? Tomorrow we will make pancakes again? A demand framed as a question. His father had the same habit. Allergic to authority, real or implied. I don't know why it didn't irritate me. Maybe it was the French accent. Who knew? I smiled and ruffled his hair. Of course. Now, I've got to take you to your father. I rounded up wayward crayons and stuffed them back in the box. Then I eased the paper from his grasp and carefully tucked it into a drawer. Let's finish this later, okay? Turning, I presented my back. Climb aboard. He jumped in exuberance, his legs encircling my waist. Holding a bit too tightly around my neck, he choked off the air. I loosened his arms and settled him on my hips. Good? He nuzzled in, his mouth next to my ear. Oui. We're off then. My eyes, full of challenge and probably a bit of hurt, met Teddie's as I moved to brush by him. I could see in his face the warning had registered. He opened his mouth to speak. I put a hand to the center of his chest to move him out of the doorway. The connection hit me like a sucker punch. I struggled to keep my composure. Don't. Clamping his mouth shut, Teddie did as I asked and stepped aside. I let my hand drop. Why had I touched him? I knew every curve and angle of his body by heart. Closing my eyes, I could remember the feel of him, as real and immediate as if we'd never stopped. But we had stopped. Well, he had stopped. Apparently my heart, not to mention other parts, hadn't gotten the memo. Pulling air into my lungs in a vain hope that some would find its way to my head, I opened my eyes and gave a half-smile to the man who had stolen my heart. Then I eased past him, careful not to touch him again. My old office, which was adjacent to my new one but lacked the whole construction zone motif, was empty, as was the outer office. The bird still slept under the nighttime cage cover. I'd never been so glad to find my staff absent, and Newton, my foul-mouthed macaw, muzzled for the moment. Teddie followed me. Go away! I threw the words over my shoulder as I burst through the outer door, then turned and hurried down the hallway toward the elevator. Giddy up! Kristoff shrieked. Teddie was hard on my heels. We need to talk. He reached for my elbow. His hand fell away as I stopped. Taking a deep breath, I turned. Kristoff fisted a hand in my hair. What do you want, Teddie? Is that boy the new French chef's? His son, yes. An emotion, one that didn't look pleasant, pulled Teddie's lips into a thin line. You didn't waste much time. I rolled my eyes. You know me. Never let a warm bed cool. Turning, I resumed my stalk down the hall. Teddie knew me well enough to know that wasn't even close to being true. The sad truth was, he probably knew me better than I knew myself, which put me at a distinct disadvantage. Lucky, you shut me out. Teddie dogged my heels. Would you stop for a minute? Go away, Teddie. Leave me alone. I don't want to talk to you. I tossed the verbal arrows over my shoulder. I have nothing to say. Okay, that was a lie. I had a ton to say, but now wasn't the time, especially with a 5-year-old on my back. Besides, I didn't like to be ambushed. Apparently, my verbal darts had finally penetrated his thick skull. When Teddie spoke again, his voice held a quiet, plaintive tone.
I couldn't stay away.
Pity. With Teddie, I had never known where the act ended and sincerity began. I still didn't, but I'd built up immunity to the whole show. My phone rang at my hip, but with both arms full of little boy and my thoughts gyrating wildly, I had more than I could deal with already, so I ignored it. Lucky for me, jangled into the sudden silence. Thank God ringtones were only a few seconds long. Christoph laid his head on my shoulder, his fingers entwined in my hair. The poor kid had traveled halfway around the world from his grandparents' farm in Provence, arriving last night, then had been too excited to sleep for long.
I had to come home, especially when your father called.
With pitch-perfect comedic timing, Teddie could deliver a punchline better than Jerry Seinfeld. I threw on the brakes mid-stride. Christoph didn't move. What? Obviously taken by surprise, Teddie skidded to a stop. He stepped in front of me, then, at the look on my face, took a step back. Everyone in my sphere knew, when my eyes got all slitty, it usually meant run. Foolish man, he stood his ground. He even squared his shoulders.
Your father called.
I heard you the first time. Teddie couldn't be lying, could he? That would be way too stupid, even for him. Why did he call you? I left the last word hanging, poised like a wrecking ball beginning its arc.
He offered me my old job back.
Really? I tried not to let him see the effect of that low blow. Betrayed by my own father and blindsided by Teddie, could life get any better today? My father was the owner of the Babylon, and, as such, complicated my life immeasurably, but usually not quite this boldly. I chewed on the inside of my cheek. And?
We're working out the terms, but I think we have a deal. He made his offer contingent on your approval.
So that's really why you're here, to get my blessing. Careful not to upset the resting boy, I stepped around Teddie and strode to the elevators. I angrily poked the down button. Even though I knew the speed with which the elevator would appear bore an inverse relationship to the fervor with which I punched. Teddie's perfect reflection eased in beside my rather ordinary one. Light brown hair, blue eyes, high cheekbones, angry scowl, a hint of hurt under a layer of homicide. Not my best look.
That's not why I'm here.
Teddie's voice held a softer tone, inviting, cajoling. Reeking of self-serving insincerity, his plea was too little, too late. I cocked a disbelieving eyebrow at his reflection. He shrugged, apparently deciding that truth might be the salve to soothe the wound. He was wrong.
Okay, it's part of the reason I'm here, but you are the main reason.
I can't tell you how happy that makes me. Sarcasm dripped from every word. So, being a rock star wasn't enough? Now you have to come back here to mess with my magic? His voice dropped.
I love you.
Low blow. Thankfully, the elevator doors eased open. I stepped inside, then turned and put a hand out, stopping him from following me. Unwilling to be singed again, I pulled my hand back before it made contact. Not now, Teddie. Maybe not ever. Maybe. Where the hell had that come from? The door slid shut, saving me from further humiliation, as tears welled in my eyes. Damn! I shouted, the word echoing in the empty elevator. Christoph's head popped up, and his body jerked in surprise. Sorry, honey.
I don't like that man. He made you mad.
I took a deep breath and calmed myself down as I dabbed at the corners of my eyes with the knuckle of my forefinger and sniffed back further emotion. He's a nice man, and he didn't make me angry. I had expectations he didn't live up to. My fault, not his. Saying the words was easy. Believing them, not so much. The boy's quizzical look reflected back to me in the polished metal doors. His face peering at me over my shoulder reminded me of an angel whispering in my ear. Stranded in the quicksand of my own confusion and ambivalence, I wished he had words of wisdom, but he was just a boy.
Maybe. He is like a puppy who has been scolded. He bites even though he is the one who has been bad.
Wow. That stopped me for a moment. My experience with children had been limited, but I guess that whole out-of-the-mouth-of-babes thing had some truth to it. You're probably right. I hitched him higher on my hips. Teddie can be quite charming. You'll like him. Everybody does.
But you don't?
I like him, but with us, it's a bit more complicated. I rolled my eyes at myself. Relationships. I totally sucked at them. Pasting on a smile, I contemplated who to kill first. My father, Teddie, Mona. I wasn't sure the order mattered. Of course, I could line them up and rid myself of the lot of them all at once. A Thanksgiving Day massacre. Tempting. Ms. O'Toole, a disembodied voice asked. The eye in the sky, our omnipresent security system.
Mr. Jerry asked me to find you. He said you weren't answering your phone.
One can run, but one can't hide? I asked the voice.
No, ma'am. I'm afraid you're screwed,
the voice said, then paused awkwardly.
That probably isn't how I'm supposed to talk to a vice president, is it?
Well, since this vice president just yelled a not-so-nice word to an empty elevator in the presence of a youngster, I'd say you were well within propriety. The elevator stopped, and the doors eased open. A middle-aged couple stood there, waiting to enter. I stayed where I was. Now, did you want something? At first, the couple looked taken aback, as if I were talking to them. Then they leaned forward slightly and glanced around the empty elevator.
Yes,
came the voice.
Mr. Jerry is apoplectic. He said to tell you that your mother is not answering her phone.
Stepping to the side and holding the door, I motioned the couple inside. At first they hesitated, but then they moved past, eyeing me as they did so. What floor? I asked them.
12,
the lady responded. I punched the appropriate button, then answered the voice. Tell him I'll be on my way after I make a quick stop in the bazaar, and I'll bring Mona if I have to shoot her with a tranquilizer dart and throw her over my shoulder. Yes, ma'am. Letting loose the doors, I stepped out. As the elevator closed, I overheard the man say, A tranquilizer dart? I wonder if she would do the same to Irene. I paused for a moment, staring at myself in the elevator doors, gathering my wits, or what was left of them. Irene. The man's comment to his female companion certainly triggered an interesting visual. Vegas, where 2 is a date and 3 is an even better date. Carefully, I shifted the boy on my back. Once again, Kristoff's head had sagged onto my shoulder, his eyes fluttering, then remaining shut. The ability to sleep anywhere. If only I could bottle some of that. Thanksgiving was 3 days away, an eternity in my world. The holidays were supposed to bring families together, to let bygones be bygones, give us a chance to relax in the presence of folks who, short of homicide, couldn't get rid of us. I wasn't feeling the magic. Apparently, I was the lone lump of coal, floating in a sea of the milk of human kindness. Or I was the only sober one in a sea of well-oiled humanity. Excited voices swirled around me as I turned and strode through the lobby. As they waited for the next check-in clerk, travelers in their Bermuda shorts, sundresses, sandals, and goosebumps rubbed their bare arms. Some cuddled against the chill. Most swilled the free champagne passed by cocktail waitresses in their barely-there togas with gold braid belts, strappy gladiator footwear with 5-inch heels, pearly smiles, and other Vegas assets properly displayed. Vegas's location in the middle of the Mojave Desert fooled most folks into thinking summer was a year-round season. Not true. Winter could be windy and chilly. Today was a perfect example. A cool breeze wafted in each time someone pushed through one of the multiple sets of double glass doors forming the Babylon's grand entry, letting in a taste of the out-of-doors. To be honest, I welcomed the change in the weather. While my life kept me teetering on the brink of insanity, 12 months of 100-degree days would shove me right over. For a moment, I let myself absorb some of the crowd's energy and enthusiasm. Glancing at the ceiling, I smiled at the Chihuly-blown glass hummingbirds and butterflies arcing in flight. A dozen skiers bombed down the indoor ski slope sheltered behind a wall of lucite on the far side of the lobby. Multicolored cloth tented above reception. Equally colorful mosaics decorated the white marble walls and floors, hinting at the Babylon's Persian motif. Unfortunately, I couldn't find a problem to solve. Everything hummed with a well-timed precision. Darn. Guess I had to deal with Mona and her turkeys. Then a dead woman and a smoking thing, which sounded like the perfect recipe for a migraine. I eased Kristoff to one hip as he slumbered, freeing a hand. With practiced motion, I grabbed my phone from its holster and flipped it open. My thumb found Mona's button. After the 5th ring, I started to ring off when she answered, her voice breathless. "Lucky, honey. This isn't a good time. Your father and I—" "TMI, Mother." I stifled a shiver of revulsion. No matter how old I got, how worldly I became, there was just something so disturbing about picturing my parents' intercoitus. And come to think about it, I grimaced at the unintentional pun as I once again shifted the boy who clung to my back like a monkey. Are you supposed to be having sex in your condition? Sex? Why are you spelling? And what are you talking about? We're hanging pictures. She stifled a giggle. Right. I shifted the phone to my other ear, holding it with my shoulder, then put a hand on my hip, nearly taking out a cute Marine as he dodged around me. Sorry, ma'am, he said as he shot me a grin. Even though the ma'am thing rankled, I allowed myself a moment to admire his ass as he hurried on. Mother, Jerry needs you downstairs. Basement level 2. Honey. Her voice dropped to a conspiratorial whisper. Can't it wait? I tried to picture Jerry, his well-armed staff, and 1,000 turkeys. No, I don't think so. Jerry needs your help with the turkeys you ordered. Mona's voice turned brusque. Oh, well, I already had the staff clear enough room in several of the walk-ins. I don't see what he needs me for. I think he wants to blindfold you and stand you against a wall. I started laughing. I couldn't help it. Seriously, Mother, I know your heart's in the right place, but couldn't you at least have ordered the turkeys already dressed? But Chef Omer said he would make the dressing. The sea of humanity in the lobby flowed around me as I let my head drop forward. My emotions, ragged and somewhat irrational, burbled up. I didn't fight them. Instead, I relinquished myself and laughed until I cried. It was the only non-self-destructive antidote to Mona and a day that, with Teddie's sudden reappearance and Romeo's little bombshell, had taken a hard turn toward abysmal. And to think, it had started so well. Warmth suffused me as I pictured my chef in his shorts and a smile. Mother. I managed to squeeze the words out with what little air was left in my lungs. Dressed means plucked, gutted, and ready to stuff. There was a pause on the other end of the line, which gave me time to compose myself somewhat. I wiped my tears on the shoulder of my blouse. I never did like the color of this one anyway. Then I bit my lip as I fought down another burble of laughter. You mean they're alive? Not the sharpest knife in the drawer. Mona apparently still had a bit of an edge. Mm-hmm, was the only sound I trusted myself to make. Oh my. I took a deep breath. Mother, at your behest, the press is coming tomorrow. And you've given the go-ahead to Crazy Carl to invite all of his fellow storm drain dwellers for the big feast on Thursday. The staff is ready to go, but I feel pretty sure they'll mutiny if you expect them to behead, gut, and pluck 1,000 turkeys. But what should I do? Her voice sounded small, imploring, like a child's. Wise to her game, I refused to play. You need to get down there ASAP. After that, I haven't a clue. You wanted to campaign for an appointment to the Paradise Town Advisory Board. You wanted to change the world one homeless person at a time, which I believe were your exact words. You wanted to run this show. Well, run it. Lucky, you're not being very helpful, she harumphed. I know. As I terminated the call, I couldn't wipe the gloat off my face. Chapter 2. After I reholstered my phone, then once again tucked an arm under one of Christoph's legs, I eased him into a more comfortable position on my back. A shiver hit me as I contemplated what awaited me on the back lot. Who was the dead girl, and why would someone kill her? I so did not want to deal with death today, unless I inflicted it. Apparently, the fates didn't care. My day was galloping off without me, and unless I wanted to be left eating dust for the foreseeable future, I figured I'd better deposit the boy with his father and jump into the fray. Jean-Charles Bouclé, Christoph's father, was a world-renowned chef who signed on to develop the signature restaurant in one of our new properties, Cielo. While he was tinkering with recipes and menus, he'd agreed to open a gourmet burger joint in the Babylon's shopping area, the Bazaar. Strictly for fun, the Burger Palais was an engaging trifle for a man of his abilities. Let's hope he didn't view me in the same way. Yes, I'd spent the night with Jean-Charles, a long, languorous, passion-filled rendezvous, capped off by a pancake breakfast, then a hot, hurried tryst in the bathroom behind closed doors, and obscured by the soundtrack from Thomas the Tank Engine. I was probably scarred for life, and most likely in need of serious chiropractic care, but my heart hummed, and there was a spring in my step even Teddie, Mona, and my father couldn't flatten. Romeo? No, he just might. Murder made me twitchy. But one problem at a time. On the far side of the lobby, just past reception, I angled to the right and entered our high-ceilinged temple to the gods of conspicuous consumption, the Bazaar. The glistening white marble floors continued from the lobby, the intricate inlays and brightly colored stones beckoning like the yellow brick road. But the Bazaar was way better than the Emerald City. Christoph still clung tightly, although he was awake now, as I dodged the window shoppers eyeing all manner of goodies, from French jeans, serious bling, and high-end shoes, my weakness, to the latest Ferrari, another weakness. Yes, even though I was immune to most of the city's vast array of excesses, I'd found it impossible to live in Vegas, the consumption capital of the world, and not get bitten by the bug. Sampson's, our salon, billed as the place where a woman's every need is met, looked like it was doing a land office business. Its double-wide, 20-foot-high wooden doors thrown open, the beauty salon displayed some of its more obvious treasures. Long-haired, beefy young men dressed in scanty togas and gladiator sandals, who balanced trays of fluted crystal filled with champagne and proffered them to the waiting patrons. A couple waited outside the Temple of Love, the Babylon's wedding chapel. The woman was fittingly dressed in a white bikini, topped with a fishnet cover-up that really didn't live up to its billing, 6-inch white stilettos, and a red rose peeking out of the string bottom half of her swimsuit. Her platinum hair draped in a flowing wave, ending just above the backs of her thighs. The groom, fully a couple of decades older than his blushing bride, sported white tie and tails. Surrounded by a mismatched gaggle of people who I hoped had some relationship to the bride and groom, they chattered excitedly. Never one to judge, I hoped the happy couple wouldn't be looking for a lawyer and a bottle of aspirin in the morning. Weddings were easy in Vegas. Annulments? Not so much. Vegas. We get you coming and going. Now there's a tagline the city fathers could be proud of. Jean-Charles's Burger Palais held a primo spot just past the Temple of Love. Perpetually open for business in this 24/7 Vegas world, the restaurant had yet to fill, the morning only now segueing toward the lunch hour. A lone hostess manned the station out front. Looking far too perky, she gave me a smile as I walked through the door, heading to the kitchen in the back. With exposed brick walls, drippy mortar, rich green leather upholstery, white tablecloths, and subdued lighting, the Burger Palais stood as a testament to its proprietor's taste and savvy, and was so much more than a burger joint. In short order, the hungry hordes would descend. In preparation, the kitchen was up and running at full bore. Billowing water vapor hissed from the steam tables. Smoke rose from coals just reaching red hot in the grill, then was quietly vacuumed into a huge hood and vented outside. Prep cooks prepped. Everyone in clean whites danced to a silent, shared rhythm, the normal pulsing tunes absent. That could mean only one thing. Jean-Charles was within hearing range. Ronaldo, Jean-Charles's right-hand chef, a huge, towering mountain of a man with 3 chins, dark dancing eyes, and a mop of curly black hair, paused to give me a grin as he checked the coals.
Can't decide which of the Bouclé men to hang with?
Each has his particular charms. I tossed him a smile. Jean-Charles in the back?
In his office.
Ronaldo gave me a warning look.
But between you and me, I wouldn't go in there without a stun gun and a taser.
That bad? My chef could be mercurial, but I'd never known his bad humor to faze Ronaldo. As if on cue, voices escalated above the kitchen noise. French voices. 2 of them. One male, that one I recognized, the other female. Ronaldo shrugged in response to my questioning glance. Christophe provided the answer.
It is Aunt Desiree,
he whispered in my ear, a hint of awe in his voice. His little legs beat against my sides as if spurring me forward. Hold on there, big guy. I'm not a pony. After a moment's hesitation, I followed the voices toward the far corner of the kitchen, where Jean-Charles had partitioned a makeshift office. As we rounded the corner, we caught Jean-Charles, his face crunched into an angry frown, and a woman who looked exactly like him, but for the obvious distinctions, in mid-tirade. Catching sight of us, both fell silent and whirled in our direction. Neither of them smiled. Walking into the middle of a fight always made me nervous. I've interrupted. I glanced between the 2 of them. Tension clouded the small space like dense smoke from a fire. I'm sorry. Christophe didn't seem to feel the same. He squealed in delight and wriggled down my back. Hang on, I said as I bent my knees so we could safely dismount. The second Christophe's feet hit the floor, his legs started churning, propelling him, arms open wide, toward the woman. Tante! A look of love smoothed her scowl and bent her lips into a smile. Throwing her arms wide, she dropped to a squat. Mon petit chou! The boy ran into her embrace, almost knocking her over. Jean-Charles placed a hand on her back, steadying her. Balance restored, he stepped back, then smiled at me, breaking the hardness in his eyes, although his cheeks remained flushed with emotion. As he moved to wrap me in his arms, I wasn't sure exactly which emotion. His hugs were strong, infused with sincerity, which gave him a huge advantage. Huge. Was there anything better than a heartfelt hug? At the moment, and considering the venue, I couldn't think of one.
Lucky, you have done something to me.
He nibbled my earlobe, making rational thought impossible. My arms encircled his waist. I'm sorry to interrupt. That wasn't really the truth, but it sounded good as I sighed into his embrace. He felt good. We felt good. I'd felt good with Teddie, too, a reality I didn't want to acknowledge. What had I missed? I pushed him from my mind, which was way easier than pushing him out of my heart. Love, the slippery slope to self-destruction. Jean-Charles must have felt me stiffen as he loosened his hold and stepped back.
I am sorry. I am being rude.
With a sweeping motion, he gestured toward the woman who now stood, eyeing me with a cold yet quizzical gaze.
Lucky, may I introduce my sister, Desiree? We are twins. She is 2 minutes older, which makes her, how do you say it, a boss?
Bossy, I answered before thinking.
This is it.
Jean-Charles clapped as if he'd been given a present.
Bossy. She is bossy, yes.
Desiree eyed me with a hint of amusement, coupled with a dose of curiosity. Her eyes were blue like her brother's, perhaps a shade darker, but equally as expressive. The same high cheekbones and the same wavy brown hair, although hers held the light kiss of the summer sun. Thin and incredibly chic in her casual dark slacks, stiff white shirt with the collar turned up, and the perfect Hermes scarf knotted around her neck, she would be intimidating even to a woman much more self-assured than I. She rose out of her nephew's hug. With her hands on Christophe's shoulders, she held her nephew, his back against her legs. Bonjour, she said in that perfect, lilting accent that made everyday words transcendent. I wanted to hate her. Actually, I wanted to turn and run, but neither was appropriate. Instead, I extended my hand. I'm lucky. At a loss, she raised one eyebrow. I stammered on. I work here. I mean, not here. I work for the Babylon. She smiled and took my hand in a firm grip. Yes, my brother, my daughter, and my mother have told me about you. A legend in my own time. I shrugged as my cheeks reddened. I could only imagine the conversations. Chantal, Desiree's daughter, had also been witness to my mourning attire and presence in her uncle's house. Being 16, She'd connected the dots.
It is a pleasure.
Desiree nodded as she let go of my hand. Likewise. I knew Jean-Charles had a sister. I just didn't know you were twins. You both are stunning. So much alike.
Yes.
Jean-Charles leapt off the sidelines and into the fray.
And we fight like animals. Like we are one mind and one heart, but two persons.
That's not so bad. I looked first at him, then to her.
You have brothers or sisters?
Desiree asked, cocking one eyebrow at me, her mouth turned down at the corners in mock amusement. Sort of. I have Mona. She looked confused. My mother, 15 years older than me. She is more trouble than I can handle.
Ah,
Desiree nodded.
This happens many times in my country as well.
I doubted anyone in France could rival Mona, but I kept that assessment to myself. I didn't know you were coming to town. Jean-Charles didn't mention it. Desiree glanced at the floor, then back to focus on something over my left shoulder.
He did not know. I had some business to take care of.
Jean-Charles explained.
Our company is providing the truffles for the last chef standing competition. They are very special truffles, but there is a problem.
I see. You will be ready for the competition, right? I didn't know a truffle from a trifle, but I figured all my experience with problems might be of use. Anything I can help with? Desiree muttered under her breath. Jean-Charles silenced her with a look. Ah, siblings. To be honest, I had no desire to get between the two of them. I could still sense their tempers, barely contained, like the flow of hot lava under a thin, cool surface.
We can handle it, thank you,
Desiree answered. Jean-Charles gave me a reassuring look, although I thought I caught a hint of waver in it. At second glance, he looked confident. Relieved, I nodded. Well, I'll let the two of you get back to your conversation, as long as you promise there won't be any bloodshed. Then, turning to my chef, I explained with a shrug as a perfunctory apology. As usual, life has gotten the better of me. Duty calls. I thought I could keep Christophe longer, but I've gotta go. Detective Romeo. Jean-Charles's tentative smile dimmed. I waved away his concern. I've gotta go.
Thank you for delivering my son. Had you called, I would have been delighted to fetch him.
A hint of worry flickered across his face, snapping his brows into a frown, and the conversation stumbled into an awkward pause. These moments confounded me. I always felt like flinging an inanity into the empty air to keep the conversation going. Then there was this whole hug or not to hug question. To kiss or not to kiss. Mixing business with pleasure. I shook my head and moved to go. Luckily, a hurtling body flew into the room, saving me from myself. Even though I ducked out of his way, he still smacked into my shoulder. Spiked black hair, tats, cold eyes, dressed in all black kitchen whites, a vaguely familiar young man skidded to a stop in between brother and sister. Neither Jean-Charles nor Desiree looked excited to see him. A moment of quiet, then a torrent of 3 raised French voices as each of them peppered the others, gesturing wildly. Christophe abandoned his aunt and clutched his father's leg, his eyes wide and scared. I'm sure he followed the conversation. The odd man out, I caught about every 4th word, which made understanding a trifle difficile. I reached for Christophe, pulling him to me, and frowned as the 3 of the nominal adults screamed and gestured, stomping a foot every now and again in emphasis. Jean-Charles should know better, but his anger had run away with him. Half of the kitchen staff had circled in behind me when Ronaldo entered the fray. With his meat-hook-sized hands, he grabbed the newcomer by the arms, lifted him, then deposited him on the stool in front of Jean-Charles's desk.
Stay there, he ordered. I ran your girlfriend off earlier. Didn't I tell you not to come back?
Looking at the other 2, he said,
Desiree, I told him you were coming into town, and he'd be wise to steer clear. I'm sorry.
He shot Jean-Charles an I told you so look. Jean-Charles, his face crimson, his breathing labored, nodded as he visibly fought for self-control. His arms at his sides, clenching his hands, he was winning the battle. His sister stilled for a moment, then launched herself at the seated interloper. Her fingers curled into wicked claws. She raked at him. The young man leaned to one side, avoiding the worst of the attack, although one fingernail left a reddening line down his forearm. Ronaldo grabbed Desiree, preventing further bloodshed. He whispered in her ear and she quieted, although her eyes still threw daggers. She moved beside her brother, and the room fell quiet.
Everybody back to work. Show's over.
Ronaldo shooed away the gathering throng, leaving the 5 of us in the small office, well, the 4 of us adults, using the term loosely, and a small, wide-eyed child clinging to my leg. Jean-Charles ruffled his son's hair, then bent and picked him up. He pressed the boy to his chest and whispered to him. Desiree seethed in the corner, but had lost the look of murderous intent. The young man whose presence had been the catalyst hugged himself and pouted from his perch on the stool. Ronaldo gave each of us a look, then settled on Jean-Charles.
I told you nothing good could come from this, but you had to go charming snakes. Well, this one is going to bite you in the ass.
Before he drifted back toward the kitchen, Ronaldo said to me,
If I were you, I'd steer clear. When these 3 are together, only bad things happen.
No response sprang to mind, so I just looked at him wide-eyed.
Told you a taser would come in handy,
he whispered as he turned, then headed back into the kitchen. Chicken, I whispered at his back. Well, so much for my quick exit stage left. I watched his retreating back for a moment, summoning courage, then I turned back to the group. On the theory that the best defense is a good offense, I clicked into corporate mode. Would someone mind telling me what this is all about? 3 raised voices started at once, only one in English. The newcomer had shifted continents. I held up my hands and closed my eyes until I had silence restored. 1 at a time. Opening my eyes, I fixed them on the man on the stool. Who are you?
Adone Giovanni.
The young Adonis? My voice rose with my surprise. I thought I'd recognized him. A young chef, a rebel, unable to get legit work in an important kitchen. I'd heard he'd taken to the underground. The pop-up guy? Adone gave me a slight bow and a rueful smile.
Pop-up?
Jean-Charles grimaced.
Such a demeaning name.
Desiree jumped in.
Pop-up? Underground? What means this?
Illegal, unlicensed, with a changing location each week. She gave a derisive snort as she rolled her eyes.
A new low.
Maybe so, I said, but he's all the rage in the underground foodie world. Word has it, he is working with the backing of one of the big-name chefs in town. Jean-Charles tossed a worried glance at his sister. He set his son back on his feet, holding the boy against his legs. I'd have thought he was using him as a shield if I didn't know better. Desiree's face reddened as she clenched her fists. I ground to a halt. You? I whispered. Jean-Charles tried to shrug it off.
It is nothing.
He waved his hand with Gallic disdain.
Along with his own dishes, he is preparing some of mine in the food truck.
Jean-Charles had bought a gourmet food truck and was using it to try some recipes for his new restaurant at Cielo to see which blew folks out of the water and which garnered only a tepid response.
He is truly a culinary genius, but alas, he is also an idiot.
He shot Adone a withering look.
You've given him your recipes?
Desiree's voice went cold and quiet.
What else have you shared? You shared your bed with him.
Jean-Charles's frustration boiled to the surface. He sliced the air with his hand as if striking red-hot iron with a hammer, banging it into shape. Desiree bristled.
That is hardly your business. You have now made it my business, haven't you?
Jean-Charles lowered his voice to a menacing growl.
I can only think what the, how do you say it, bed talk was like.
Pillow talk, I corrected before I thought about it. Jean-Charles and his trouble with American idioms. Sorry, I added, when the 2 of them turned on me. A feeble attempt at placating, and one that was about as effective as trying to tame lions with a garden hose. After glaring at me for a moment, both of them resumed peppering each other with rapid-fire French. Enough! I guess I scared them, as they both swallowed their next comments and whirled to face me. Inserting my bulk between brother and sister, I put one hand on Jean-Charles's chest, holding him at bay. With the other hand, I grabbed Desiree's arm, anchoring her where she stood. When I was sure they'd stay rooted for the moment, I reached for Christophe, setting him on my hip as I shot his father a look telegraphing my displeasure. I kept a wary eye on his aunt. Her thinly veiled lust for dismemberment didn't give me warm fuzzies, But I understood. My father's recent shenanigans with Teddie had my hand itching for something sharp and well-honed surgical steel. "Why don't you bring me up to speed? In English?" I directed the question to the happy little band assembled in front of me, hoping one of them could muster the control to answer. Desiree took the bait. She gestured grandly toward Adonne.
He is the Satan, the devil. He will be my ruin.
She placed her hands on her hips and leveled her gaze at her brother as if she was leveling a gun.
And now, my brother. Men!
They should not be allowed to live. The words were out of my mouth before the filter of self-preservation had a chance to capture them. Jean-Charles shot me a startled glance, which I answered with a benign smile. Then I studiously ignored him. "However, I haven't met a man yet who was worth jail time. So what's your beef with Adonne?" As I glanced at the young chef with his whole punk rock thing and the attitude to match, I figured he was probably pretty good at setting people's teeth on edge.
He is stealing my business.
Desiree spat the words, each one a bullet. Adonne huffed and answered with a sneer.
"That is absurd."
Why would he do that? Hatred etched her every feature as she glared at him.
He is my husband.
Of course he is. Why was it that lately, no matter what the problem was, I failed to see the final twist, the last turn of the knife? Adonne jumped in.
"It is not me."
As he shot his wife a wary glance, he pressed a hand to his chest in emphasis.
"It is Fiona."
At the woman's name, Desiree made some feline guttural sound. I stilled her with a glare. "Fiona?" I asked her husband.
His mistress,
Desiree purred, which had me worried.
She is a stupid cow. Not only does she have poor taste in men, but she also thinks she knows truffles.
"She wants your husband and your business." I gave one of those half-smile snorts of appreciation. "I'll say this for her. She's got balls." The room fell quiet. I cringed. I said that out loud, didn't I? Jean-Charles smiled a tight smile.
"Yes, but you are right. The woman is brazen."
"A real bitch," Adonne and Desiree said in unison, then glared at each other, refusing to be amused.
"And lately,"
Adonne continued,
"she is acting crazier than normal, making all kinds of threats."
"What kind of threats?"
"She is crazy. She is wishing us all to hell. That sort of thing."
Adonne shrugged. "Any idea why?" The three of them looked at me, wide-eyed, as if I'd just disproven the old adage that there is no such thing as a stupid question.
She wants what we have,
Desiree added, saving me.
"Fiona,"
Jean-Charles said with a note of finality. A look passed between him and Adonne. "All want and no work," I summarized for myself, since no one else paid me any attention, caught as they were in their own battle. Desiree put her hands on her hips and stared between the two men.
"I will deal with you later," she said to Jean-Charles. "And that man, Salut."
She gestured dismissively toward her future former husband.
"He is the ruin of me."
"Aren't they all?" That got another interesting look from Jean-Charles. My cynicism was apparently peeking its ugly head through the thin, yes dear, veneer. Jean-Charles stepped toward Adonne, prodding the young man's chest with his forefinger.
"I have, how do you say, moved to the end of the branch."
He glanced at me. "Gone out on a limb?"
"This, yes."
He turned back to Adonne.
"I have gone out on a limb for you, extending my reputation to you. And this is the thanks I get? You try to ruin my sister? It's not me."
Adonne wilted under his brother-in-law's frown.
"You must fix this,"
Jean-Charles growled, each word heavy with conviction.
"I am giving you a chance when all others had turned their backs. Don't fuck it up."
He may have trouble with idioms, but he got that bit of American vernacular just right. Christoph clutched my neck so tightly, I had to loosen his hold so blood trickled to brain, and I could muster a thought or two.
"And if Fiona comes within shouting distance of my family, I will kill her myself."
You wouldn't be referring to Fiona Richards, would you? Detective Romeo pushed into the small space, followed by a couple of uniforms who crowded in behind him. Brusque and businesslike, the young detective focused on Jean-Charles. "Romeo?" I blurted, startled at the intrusion. I thought we were supposed to meet on the back lot. He ignored me. Rumpled and stick-thin, he wore a tired trench coat, dark slacks, his tie loose around the collar of a blue shirt, and a serious expression. His sandy hair was a bit mussed and longer than normal. I liked the look. Well, other than the cowlick that stood at the crown of his head like a flag in the wind. Jean-Charles nodded.
Fiona Richards? Yes. She does not deserve to live.
Desiree spat as she cut him off.
Really?
Romeo cocked an eyebrow at her, then glanced around the group, his eyes coming to rest on mine.
Well then, you'll be happy to know Ms. Richards was found dead.
His eyes shifted to Jean-Charles.
In your food truck.
For a moment, the world stopped turning. I was sure of it, as my heart fell to my feet. Desiree's mouth hung open. Jean-Charles paled. Only Adonne seemed nonplussed. Christophe piped up.
A dead lady? Cool.
The boy's fluency in English still surprised me. I kept forgetting he'd spent most of his life with his father in New York while he opened his restaurants there. At last count, he had 3. All the adults, using the term loosely, started talking at once. Jean-Charles plucked his son from my arms, swung him to his hip, and turned to leave. Romeo stopped him with a hand on his arm.
We need to talk.
He drew in a deep breath, composing himself.
Not in front of my son, please.
Romeo nodded and let him go. I watched him, holding his son tight and nuzzling him as he found Ronaldo in the kitchen. A few words passed between the two men. Then Jean-Charles offloaded the small boy into the waiting man's arms. Jean-Charles returned, snaking an arm around my waist. I could feel him shaking. Murder could do that. My pulse restarted, and I grabbed Romeo by the shoulder and pulled him around to face me. The food truck? Where exactly?
On the Babylon's back lot.
He kept his eyes roaming over our small group.
The door to the truck was open. Security checked it out, then called us.
How long ago?
An hour, maybe a bit more.
Romeo paused.
She hadn't been dead long. The body was still warm.
3 excited voices started babbling in French. Romeo raised his hand, silencing them.
In English, or I'll arrest all of you.
They fell silent. No cameras on the back lot, I muttered, thinking out loud. Convenient. Jean-Charles scowled his displeasure. I couldn't blame him. The situation wasn't exactly making my day either. Romeo turned to the other 3, leaving me out.
I'm going to need to get statements from each of you.
Jean-Charles's feathers ruffled.
You cannot be serious. I have a restaurant to run. And I have a dead woman in your food truck.
Romeo, with dark circles under his eyes and skin so sallow it appeared almost translucent, looked like the walking dead. He stuffed his notepad back where he'd found it.
We can do this the easy way, or the hard way. Your choice.
Jean-Charles flushed with barely controlled anger. As I turned to go, he grabbed my arm.
I am having some trouble with the new oven in Cielo. You will meet me there later?
I fixed him with a steady gaze.
Please,
he added, perhaps remembering too late that I was not one of his minions who took orders.
I know it is not convenient, but I am meeting a friend there, and I would like you to take a look. You always know what to do.
I weighed his words as I mentally walked through my day. I had time, but not for a bit. Give me a couple of hours. With a glance at Romeo, he nodded curtly.
I will be there.
I was nursing my 3rd Diet Coke at the bar in the Burger Palais when Romeo straddled the stool next to me. About time you showed up, I said. I'm practically floating away. I took a long pull through the straw until I exhausted the soda and pulled in air. The rude noise made me smile. Mona had always reprimanded me for doing the same thing when I was young, so of course I took delight in it. Still did.
I needed time to separate the 3 of them and put an officer on each one to take a statement. I don't know anything about this Fiona Richards, but whatever she did to those folks, it runs deep.
You don't really think... I stopped him before he answered. I knew what he was going to say. I know, it's not what we think, it's what we can prove, or disprove.
You're worried about your chef.
Romeo motioned for the bartender to give him one of what I was having.
You like him, then?
What's not to like? I stared into my glass, trying to sort out my jumbled emotions, but that proved to be like capturing lightning bugs. When you open the jar to trap another, those inside escaped and flew away. Romeo eyed the bottles behind the bar as he swirled the Diet Coke in his glass. You wouldn't have something with a bit more kick to it, would you? Bourbon for breakfast? I'm not sure I could live with myself if I led you down the road to sin and perdition. Seriously? Clearly Romeo thought I was amusing. Glancing at him, I realized he had aged a decade during our brief association, and he was developing some of my bad habits, which didn't make me feel good in the least. I guess I'm not the best influence, I admitted grudgingly. To be honest, my recent comfort with the bottle had me a bit worried, not something I would readily admit. Heck, it was hard enough to admit it to myself. Delusion, sometimes desirous, sometimes disastrous. I knew I needed to be careful. While balance was a concept I understood, I found it next to impossible to apply. Vegas and temptation, virtually synonymous. Wow, you've gone all quiet and pensive. I didn't know you had it in you, Romeo teased. I knew he was trying to lighten my mood. If you're trying to make me feel better, you suck at it. As I recall, we established that some time ago. That got a grin out of me, despite my best efforts. Ah! He pointed at me like a kid rubbing it in. See? I can be taught new tricks. I think we established that some time ago as well. His smile faded as he backed off his stool. Save some of that firewater for later, okay? He told the bartender. Sure thing, sir. The young lady shot me a questioning shrug. We'll be back. I pointed to a bottle on the top shelf. And the 101 is ours. Romeo put a hand on my shoulder. Right now, I've got a crime scene to process. Care to join me? For old time's sake? Romeo had been a greenhorn when we met chasing a weasel. We'd cemented our relationship tracking down a killer who had tossed an oddsmaker into the shark tank. Since then, we'd gone on to bigger and better things. Once the teacher, I'd now become the sidekick, and I actually liked it. Expectations were lower. In a perfect Columbo impersonation, Romeo patted his pockets as he tilted his head forward and looked at me from under his brows. Don't let it go to your head. I'm just throwing you a bone to keep you from gnawing on my leg. Jean-Charles's food truck was parked on the unpaved, sandy expanse at the rear of the parking lot behind the Babylon. Technically not part of our official lot, guests used it anyway. So did the hotel, parking extra corporate vehicles back there. The rub was that, since it wasn't an official public use area, our video surveillance didn't cover it. As Romeo and I pushed out the back doors of the hotel, I got a full view of the Presidio, my former home, one floor below Teddie's penthouse. The apartment building had been perfect, for a while. I could walk to work, walk upstairs. A tall cylinder of glass and steel, the Presidio was the finest place to live in town. At least, that's what the brochure said. Rectangles of dark and light formed a mosaic up the side of the building, as various occupants opened their shades to welcome the sunlight, or left them shuttered against the growing warmth of the day. My eyes followed the pattern to the top floor. I didn't want to look, but I couldn't resist. The windows of the penthouse were uncovered, the shades that had blocked them for months now retracted. When Teddie had left, I'd turned the light out and moved into the hotel. I had a small apartment next to my parents'. A place to sleep. It wasn't home. Romeo followed my gaze. Looking up, he pursed his lips. The top floor? That's Teddie's place, right? Mm-hmm. Looks like somebody's home. The detective turned and looked at me. A deer caught in the headlights of an onrushing life. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Teddie. Romeo let his gaze drift upwards. I'm glad I don't have your problems. Thanks. It had to happen at some point. I mean, the guy couldn't stay gone forever. Why not? Romeo laughed as if I wasn't serious. He hooked his arm through mine. Come on. Maybe giving me a hand with the dead girl will help. Homicide. Just what the doctor ordered. Chapter 3. The food truck was easy to find. squatting in the middle of a circle of floodlights, surrounded by crime scene technicians, with the whole area cordoned off by the yellow tape used to delineate the boundaries of horror. The scene looked like a CSI location shoot. Alas, no cameras, no make-believe. This was real. Reality. Not something most Las Vegans were equipped to deal with. And it had happened in my backyard. Even worse, the noose of suspicion encircled people I cared about. Romeo ducked under the tape, then held it up for me. He paused to talk with one of the technicians, and I circumnavigated the truck, getting my bearings. A typical food truck. It was already several years old when Jean-Charles bought it a month ago. I knew that because I'd helped him find the thing. My job offered me almost limitless pies to stick my fingers in. As a result, I was the go-to gal when anyone needed anything done. Not as much fun as it sounds. But then again, I'd lost my smile. Vegas boasted a cadre of gourmet food trucks, serving everything from fancy sliders to high-end tacos, which sounds like an oxymoron but isn't, to full-fledged creations by multi-starred chefs, especially those chefs who, like Jean-Charles, used the trucks as platforms to not only attract a new and younger clientele, but also to try new recipes that might not please the palates of their established followers. From time to time, the Babylon hired the food trucks and their cast of flamboyant culinary wunderkinder to provide an interesting twist to a promotional party or a fun slice of West Coast hip for patrons hailing from somewhere lacking a cool factor. Because of my love of food, I usually volunteered to ride herd on the truck vendors. Sometimes I even had to play my rung on the corporate ladder as a trump card to get the gig. When it came to food, I lost my ability to play well with others. Sharing was not in my gastronomic repertoire. And when Jean-Charles had floated the idea of using the food truck as a combination billboard and test kitchen, I thought it brilliant. Boy, had that idea backfired. Like everything in Vegas, the truck had a light coating of dust. Here in the Mojave, we have such a problem with dust, the city bought billboards to remind residents to refrain from off-roading. Of course, there wasn't much the city fathers could do about the wind, and it regularly blew hard enough to sandblast all in its path. As I eased my way around the truck, I made mental notes. Dented right fender, headlight rim also dented. The rear bumper had a scrape of black paint. Nothing stood out, and it would be impossible to tell when and how any of the bumps and bruises had happened. The tires, down to their last millimeter of tread, were a halo of crusty mud. I couldn't remember the last time it rained. Sometime in July, I thought. The monsoon season, a moniker that made me laugh. Monsoons conjured jungles, trees laden with vines, humidity, and man-eating felines. While Vegas had all three, all of them were kept indoors and had nothing to do with the amount of rainfall. Coming full circle, I paused at the steps leading into the truck and leaned in. Several technicians were wedged into the small space, hunched over the body, plucking, dusting, and bagging. I never got used to the indignity of death, which transformed a living, breathing being into a thing. I watched for a moment, not really thinking, trying not to feel. Although the text blocked some of my view, I caught glimpses. The body contorted, the hands pulled behind and bound. The feet, also bound, were brought up to the hands and somehow trussed together, pulling the body into a backward bow. I couldn't see much more than that, and I didn't really want to. Death was never pretty. Romeo stepped behind me and leaned over my shoulder. "What are you doing?" Trying not to look, but I can't help myself. How was she killed? "I told you, with a safety smoke. It sorta looks like a gun thing that you use in cooking." I shot Romeo a look. "If you have the smoking gun, then your job's done, right? Piece of cake." He didn't smile. "I said a smoking gun-like thing, not the smoking gun. A subtle but important distinction. You've been watching too many old movies. Actually, the smoking thing didn't kill her. The plastic around her head did." After weighing my options for a nanosecond, I took the bait. What, then, is a safety smoke exactly? Apparently, it is a device that chefs use to impart smoky flavor to various foods, cheeses, and the like. It looks like a large plastic handgun with a reservoir for the wood chips and a nozzle the smoke comes out of. You cover the food you want to smoke with plastic, then stick in the nozzle. He gave me a knowing look.
but this brings a whole new meaning to the concept of smoked.
I could picture the poor woman, her head wrapped in plastic, suffocating, while someone imparted a mesquite flavor to her flesh. Or perhaps they preferred her apple smoked. A shudder of revulsion rippled through me. Blinking rapidly, I shook off the visuals. Once again, I leaned in to catch another glimpse of poor Fiona. I don't care how awful she was or wasn't. Suffocating was a terrible way to die. Not that any of the options were all that great. Like Hannibal Lecter, but with a discerning palate, I said, instantly regretting the words. Sort of.
I'm going to pretend you didn't really say that.
Romeo wasn't completely successful at keeping the grin out of his voice. A daily dose of death required a morbid sense of humor for psychological survival. Cops had it, doctors too, and apparently so did I, but mine was born from panic welling up inside me. An odor caught my attention. Tentatively, I pulled in air through my nose, testing, identifying. Smell that? Romeo leaned over my shoulder and sampled the air.
Death.
Yes, but beyond that. Like a lion testing the wind, he closed his eyes and sniffed. Breathing deeply, he ticked up a corner of his mouth in a half smile.
Truffles.
"We've got a problem," Miss P, my second-in-command, said as I burst through the office door. As usual, she was sitting behind her old desk in the outer office instead of occupying her new digs in my former office. I'd been booted up to vice president, and Miss P had filled my former head of customer relations shoes, a game of corporate musical chairs that effectively changed nothing. When I'd walked in, I'd caught her in the act of dialing the phone. Slowly, she replaced the receiver in its cradle as she blinked at me. As usual, her golden hair was spiked, her makeup subtle. Her eyes held the embers of afterglow, no doubt a gift from her much younger lover, the beautiful Jeremy Whitlock, Las Vegas's primo PI. The whole cougar thing had me a bit envious. But with my heart so recently splintered on the shoals of love, prudence dictated that I wait a bit before wading into the deep end again. Not that prudence was one of my strong suits or anything. I parked my butt on the corner of her old desk and reached for the pile of messages in my inbox. "Why are you sitting out here and not in your office?" She leveled her gaze at me over the top of her cheaters.
Don't you want to know what the problem is?
"Does it have anything to do with a homicide on our back lot?" That stopped her.
No.
"Then not really." As I flipped through the notes, I pretended to be consumed. Like working a poker hand, I pulled a couple that I wanted to keep, then tossed the others.
What homicide?
I waved her question away. "Romeo's on it."
I see,
Miss P said, although it was clear she didn't, which made me smile since I did the same thing all the time. So I segued back to the original topic. "The way I figure it, you'll tell me what the problem is when you're ready. Until then, I'm happy with the whole ignorance is bliss thing."
A kinder and gentler Lucky? Patience is a virtue and all of that?
Miss P raised an eyebrow and fought a smile.
There wasn't really a homicide on property, was there?
"Apparently." With a forefinger, I nudged my golden cockroach paperweight back from the edge of the desk. It had been a gift from the employees after dealing with a guest and his pests, and I was sorta attached to it. "What is this doing out here?"
I have no idea.
Miss P looked like she was losing patience with my lack of interest in her problem, the one she desperately wanted to make mine.
I'll put it back on your desk.
I nodded, not really concerned. Everyone knew if they took that paperweight, I would consider it a capital crime. For the record, I'm cultivating the talents necessary to move further up the corporate ladder.
Passing the buck?
"Please," I said, taking mock offense. "Delegating. Sloth, avarice, and a taste for 3 martini lunches are next." I shot her a grin. "But I wouldn't hold my breath if I were you. The delegating thing is still a work in progress, although I'm warming to it. I just tossed 1,000 live turkeys into Mona's lap. Well, not just, but a few hours ago." A smile bloomed across her face.
Oh, I'd pay good money for a ticket to that.
To be honest, I'm feeling pretty proud of myself. I folded my messages and stuffed them in the tiny pocket in my suit. Versace wasn't known for his pockets. Mother's driving me nuts with talk of testing the waters for a run at a seat on the Paradise Town Advisory Board. Now she's waxing poetic about the girls doing a bake sale to raise money for a possible campaign. How much can she possibly hope to raise with a bake sale? Miss P looked at me over the top of her cheaters.
Well, when you're talking about a bunch of hookers from Pahrump selling their buns in the parking lot at Smokin' Joe's XXX Video Emporium, I'd say the sky's the limit.
My heart sank. She was right. If Mona took full reign, the bake sale would turn into a national news event. The same thing happened when she tried to auction off a young woman's virginity. She should have learned her lesson, but Mona wasn't big on lessons. Mona had been my cross to bear, but she recently married my father, thereby terminating my illegitimacy and simplifying my life, in theory. Technically, my father, who was also my boss and the owner of the Babylon, was my mother's keeper now that she had given up her eponymous whorehouse in Pahrump, my childhood home, and moved into the Babylon. But unlike his daughter, my father was good at delegating, and when Mona made a mess, she still looked to me to show up with a broom. But she was on her own with the turkeys, proving once again I was more like my father than I thought. Maybe one day I'd believe it. So I shelved the bake sale. Today's worry plate was full. You can watch Mona leading the poultry parade for free. Basement level 2, although the show is probably about over. And the homicide. Romeo's problem. I didn't add that, given the players, it would most likely become my problem. At the moment, I lacked the fortitude to shoulder that little bit of fun. So I feigned glibness and ignored the looming storms. All of them. Now, what's the problem that's got your knickers in a twist?
We have a tiny trifle with a truffle.
She delivered the words without even a hint of a smile. Impressive. I think that's redundant. I boosted myself off her desk. Alliterative, but redundant. She shrugged.
Actually, it's not a trifle with a truffle, exactly.
A hint of a smile tugged at one corner of her mouth.
It's really a problem with a pig.
A pig?
Well, Chef Gregor.
Miss P ground to a halt, raising my caution flag. I probably didn't want to know, not really, but my Pavlovian response to all problems goaded me into hurling myself into the fire. Chef Gregor? His name puckered my lips like a bad taste. For a moment in time, he had been the proprietor of the failed Italian restaurant, occupying the space that now housed the Burger Palais. He is a bit of a pig, but I'm not sure I'd be so cavalier as to call him that. I hear he has important friends and a bad habit of getting even. Miss P cocked an eyebrow at me.
Chef Gregor invited the truffler and the pig who found the prized truffle to the party.
I blinked at her for a moment, absorbing. I need to sit down. I can tell. I sank into one of the chairs against the wall of glass overlooking the lobby below. I stretched my legs out in front of me and leaned back, fighting the feeling that I might tip and fall through the glass. I knew I wouldn't, but it made me nervous just the same. The truffler?
The truffle pig handler.
Truffle pig?
The pig that found the prized truffle.
You said that already.
Just making sure you're following all of this. It's important.
I thought you said it was a trifle. Over the top of her cheaters, she gave me the stink eye.
You do remember we are holding a truffle worth a small fortune, and it is to be the key ingredient in the chef competition on Friday.
I have my shortcomings, but I usually don't forget televised affairs being hosted by the hotel, nor our participation in them. I shot her a narrow-eyed look. I wasn't aware we were responsible for the care and feeding of the special truffle.
Not technically.
Then, technically, it's not our problem. And just to clarify, don't they use dogs to find truffles these days?
Yes, but a pig is just more prosaic, don't you think?
Clearly, it doesn't matter what I think. Just don't tell me there is a four-legged pig in my hotel. I was well aware that, at any given time, there were several hundred of the two-legged Y-chromosomed variety, hence the need to clarify.
It's a very special pig.
Miss P sounded hopeful, as if that might make a difference. And where is this special pig, exactly? Her eyes skittered from mine as she developed a sudden interest in something over my shoulder. She worried with a button on her cashmere sweater as she chewed on her lip, which didn't make me feel very good.
Bungalow 7, she whispered.
I stared up at the ceiling as if praying for guidance from a higher power. My mother organizing a grassroots constituency of working girls, turkeys running loose in the basement, my chef and his sister caught up in homicide and betrayal. The pig in the Casbah was just the cherry on top of a real Sunday of a Sunday. At least, I thought it was Sunday. Or was it Monday? In Vegas, day ran into night until one lost track of not only hours, but also days and weeks and months. Some days I couldn't even remember the season and if I should dress warmly or not. Looking outside never helped. It was always sunny. Just another day in the asylum. Miss P seemed a bit stricken, maybe even contrite, an unusual state, so I thought it wise to milk it for all it was worth. I tried to look stern, but really, when I thought about it, all I could see was the humor. Well, about the pig anyway, but I refused to let Miss P see that. "You put the pig in the Casbah?" I used my best irritated hotel executive tone, and I focused on a spot in the ceiling, afraid that I would grin if I looked her in the eye. The Casbah was our high roller compound. Hidden, exclusive, decadent. It was a real feat to score a room there. I could just imagine what Cher would say if she got wind that we had given one of our most opulent bungalows to a pig. Last time she stayed with us, she had to settle for our largest suite on the 29th floor, the second most coveted location in the hotel. I bit down on my lip, fighting another smile. To be honest, pigs weren't that worrisome, and they just declared miniature horses to be seeing eye animals, requiring the hotel to accommodate them, so I'd better get used to handling a barnyard. Frankly, I was relieved it wasn't that horrible man with all the cockroaches, who had returned with an anaconda. The memory chased a shudder of revulsion down my spine. "That means someone is walking on your grave." "What?" Miss P nodded matter-of-factly as I struggled to keep my tenuous grasp on reality. "A shudder means someone is walking on your grave." "I'm not dead, so I don't have a grave." I held up my hand, stopping her from interjecting. "Never mind, you're changing the subject. Back to the pigs, both of them." If she was going to drop a couple of pigs in my lap, I was bound and determined to make her pay for it. Just a little. "You do know pigs will eat anything, including prized truffles?" Miss P waved a hand at me. "The truffle is under lock and key, so don't worry about that." Whenever anyone says, "don't worry about that," I get a really bad feeling. Sort of like when someone says, "I need to hook you up with my brother's college roommate." She started to take the bait, but I shut her down with a glare, although it failed to wipe the smug smirk from her face. "You know, you are not making my day easier. I need to find better staff." "Good luck with that." Miss P didn't seem bothered, which was understandable. She was as close to indispensable as anyone could be. "Do you think I could fire family as well?" "Yours?" She scoffed. "Not a chance. Even if you shot them, they'd come back to haunt you." Now that was a scary thought. For a moment, I ran through the list of people I could pass off the pig to. It didn't take me long. The list was pretty short. Just 2 names, mine and Jerry's, and Jerry was busy penning up poultry at the moment. He was also handling Mona, so I didn't feel right about dropping another farm animal in his lap. Although we were both well-versed in farm animals, one of the perks of the job. Just so you know, pigs will also eat $1,000 per yard damask for starters. Ah, that shut down Miss P's smirk. "Why don't you tell me what's wrong with the pig and exactly why it's in Bungalow 7? "Chef Gregor threatened to pull the truffle if we didn't cater to the pig. You know how he is, ranting and raving, threatening to go to the press. I thought it was easier to placate him than fight back." "So, you left that for me," I added unnecessarily. After all, handling turkeys was within my job description. Some days, whining just felt good, and this was one of those days. I'd get over myself soon. Apparently, Chef Gregor wants his 15 minutes. Let's give them to him. "For the record, I'd like to shoot that man." Miss P tossed that out as an afterthought. "You'd have to stand in line. But patience, my friend. Perhaps he'll choke on his dinner, get a bad piece of fish or something. It could happen." I fought the urge to give her Mona's double barrel when she was through with it. Taking Chef Gregor out of the gene pool would be a huge favor to future generations. With half a mind, I wondered if that fact alone would be sufficient for an acquittal. I pulled my feet back toward me and leaned forward, my hands on my knees. Better not take that chance. I'll handle Chef Gregor. But what's the problem with the pig?
She's depressed.
As I strode through the casino, I tried to get my mind around the idea of a depressed pig, but I was struggling with the concept. What did a pig have to be depressed about? Especially a pig ensconced in Bungalow 7, replete with hot and cold running foot servants and a 24-hour chef. Other than having to deal with a swine like Chef Gregor, of course. The casino echoed the Persian theme of the lobby, with palms, darkly hued walls dotted with open flames under glass, and leafy plants in the corners to add warmth. Cloth dyed in an array of bright colors, tented above the rows of slot machines and sheltered Delilahs. A watering hole set in the center of the room on a raised platform. Guests crowded around the bar and the piano as I moved past. Teddie used to play that piano. My heart constricted. Teddie. He'd broken my heart. I'd patched it as best I could, but now he was back, breaking open the thin scab. The pain lingered. I wondered when it would go away, or if it ever would. With him underfoot, my chances at a cure were slim. That much I knew. But what to do? Why did life always throw me a curveball just when I'd timed the fastball? From the tables around me, the energy level rose on a crescendo of enthusiasm. Throngs 2 and 3 deep circled each game. Collective groans, occasionally offset by cheers, rolled through the room, overriding the thump of energetic background music. Cocktail waitresses darted in and out of the crowd like hummingbirds testing the nectar of various flowers. The fact that the waitstaff could manage that dance on 5-inch heels continually amazed me. At the far side of the casino, tucked at the end of a long, nondescript corridor that, like the cave leading to Shangri-La, offered not one hint of the riches that lurked beyond, a world of opulence, decadence, and comfort. The Casbah, where a guest's every need would be met promptly and discreetly. Okay, perhaps not their every need. The crazy Russian who demanded we hang gilded swords from the Tsarist's era over her bed had been a bit of a challenge, but our resourcefulness prevailed. One of our bellmen knew a guy in L.A. who collected the things. Another guest wanted a bed that Frank Sinatra had slept in. That one had been a bit easier. Vegas's history wasn't very old, and her fans were rabid. With each new request came a new challenge. As the chief problem solver, I got to establish the boundaries of reason. Although fairly understanding, I drew the line at farm animals, for now. After all, that Hollywood hunk who wanted a goat had left unsatisfied, so some overly inflated culinary bombast wasn't going to get his pig either. Huge double bronze doors folded back, open like an inviting embrace, marked the entrance to the Casbah. Hieroglyphics of thin figures that looked suspiciously like ancient Egyptians had been pressed into the metal for that ever-important air of authenticity. Potted date palms softened the corners. I half expected to see a camel lurking to the side. I mean, that would sort of fit with the whole animal farm problem I had going on. I glanced around. Alas, no camel. I couldn't decide whether I was relieved or disappointed, which had me worried. Every time I stepped into the Casbah, I felt like Dorothy landing in Oz. Under a domed glass roof high above, the Casbah nestled in a bath of natural sunlight, diffused and filtered for the perfect ambiance, of course. Water burbled from the fountains, and foliage lined the stream that pooled and meandered through the complex of separate bungalows. With private swimming pools, floor plans larger than most homes in the valley, and a staff-to-guest ratio of 5-to-1, our very private, très chic bungalows were the most sought-after prizes in Vegas. And we'd put a pig in one of them. Bracing myself, I pulled the heavy cord hanging by the door to Bungalow 7. Chimes echoed inside, and footfalls quickened to the door. Contemplating the pressed images on the door, which was a smaller replica of the large doors bracketing the entrance to the Casbah, I half expected a Nubian to swing the door open and usher me inside with a bow. Instead, a member of our solicitous staff greeted me with a nod and a pained expression. Before I could say anything, he was muscled aside by the person I came to do battle with, Chef Gregor. With a pasty complexion flushed with exertion and misted with sweat, jowls that folded his skin like a Venetian blind, beady dark eyes, and thin, mean lips. He looked one pat of butter shy of a heart attack. At just over 6 feet, he could almost carry the extra 100 pounds or so, but his stomach oozed over his belt, and his sleeves stretched over the flesh of his arms like casing around sausages. To add insult to injury, he wore his thin black hair greased back, completing the disgusting picture, which his personality perfectly complemented. The chef pointed a thick forefinger at me.
You, what have you done with my truffle?
What truffle? I stammered, blindsided once again, a recurring theme today. I heard you have a problem with a pig. He waved his hands as if shooing flies, then leveled a pitying look.
You are misinformed.
I felt like saying, honey, that's where I live. But instead, I summoned years of practice to keep my voice steady and asked, how so?
The problem is not with the pig. It is with the truffle.
Turning on his heel, he stalked into the bowels of Bungalow 7. I had no alternative but to follow him. The smell hit me first. Musty and ripe, it wasn't the normal potpourri of blended spices and exotic unguents used to fragrance the bungalows. As I entered the great room, the scene in front of me left me speechless. A rare and somewhat dangerous occurrence. The hand-knotted silk carpet had been casually rolled back, exposing the rough-cut oak flooring. Burnished to a dark, rich sheen, it was a work of art. I'd personally supervised the men on their hands and knees as they'd polished the wood with their little steel wool pads, then stained it so many times I'd lost count. My eyes got all slitty. Like some life-sized erector set, a metal-fenced enclosure grew from the middle of the wooden expanse. A puffy bedding of straw filled the pen. A metal trough completed the bucolic picture. Well, the trough and the huge black and white pig that stared into the filled feed bin but didn't eat. Chef Gregor stopped in front of the pig and turned to face me. With a superior look, he reached into a burlap sack on the floor and extracted a large, bulbous object that looked curiously like a white truffle. But it couldn't be, could it? Hadn't Miss P said she had the thing under lock and key? After all, it was worth a small fortune to the proper culinary expert. Where did you get that? I was getting a real bad feeling. I watched him struggle with himself for a moment, then he looked me in the eye.
Fiona had it.
Fiona Richards? I tried to keep the shock off my face and out of my voice. If he knew she was dead, he hid it well. Where did she get it?
She made a delivery to Burger Palais. She saw the box. When no one was watching, she took a look. When she saw the truffle, she pocketed it and brought it to me. She knew it was not my truffle, not the Alba.
Gregor pulled out the same handkerchief I'd seen him use earlier, which I found a bit disgusting. Or maybe that was just the chef's normal effect on me. This time, he blew his nose into it. Where did she give it to you? I searched his face. If he was lying, I'd broil him myself.
Right here, in this bungalow.
His eyes held mine. Was anybody else there?
No.
His voice was firm. When?
Early this morning. Her call woke me up. It was around 7 a.m., I think.
He took a deep breath.
You can check the video feeds. They will confirm what I say.
I will. I gave him my best steely stare. He didn't wilt. If he was that confident, I felt sure the tapes would jibe with his story. I'd ask Jerry to check, but I wouldn't red flag it. So, I'm confused. You say this truffle isn't the real truffle? The one you bought? Stepping back, Gregor gave me a look that I couldn't read. He raised his hand. The light dawned, but rooted to the floor, unable to raise even a hand to stop him, I stared in horror as the chef dropped the truffle into the pig's feed bin. It landed with a weighty thunk. Adrenaline surged. Fear overrode inertia. I leaped toward the pen. No!
The pig? She is not interested.
The quiet words from the corner stopped me. I whirled to face the man who had uttered them. Short and round, with a cherubic weathered face, gray curls, and a kerchief tied jauntily around his neck. He wrung his hands as he glanced at me, then cast a worried look at the pig. The fabric of his pants was shiny with wear, and his checkered shirt was faded on the shoulders as if from long days spent in the sun. I'd guess this was the truffler.
You see?
He said, as he gestured toward the pig, who had turned up her nose at the proffered truffle.
She does not want that truffle.
His voice was soft, heavily accented in that sexy French way. What was it about accents that turned normally smart American women all stupid? As I struggled to understand, I felt my IQ plummet. Why not? His mouth turned down at the corners, and he gave a shrug.
It is not a good truffle.
Totally adrift, I stood there with my mouth open. Clearly my coping skills were at a low ebb. Finally, I managed to pull myself together, snapping my mouth shut and summoning a semblance of cogent thought. Where is the good truffle? Chef Gregor looked like he was about to stroke out as he stepped into my space and pushed his face into mine.
Against my better judgment, I gave it to Chef Bouclé.
Jean-Charles? I squeaked.
Mm-hmm. He is the only one with the proper refrigeration controls to keep a truffle of that quality appropriately cooled. You do know that once truffles are harvested, they are at their peak for only a few days and must be cooled?
I nodded, pretending I had a clue as to what he was talking about.
Jean-Charles has stolen my truffle.
Chef Gregor poked me in the chest, emphasizing each word as he growled.
You tell your chef he is a dead man.